Welcome and thanks for joining us. I'm Shirley Robertson and it's my great pleasure to bring you this update on America's Cup 37. And how fantastic to watch again those amazing scenes from Auckland at the start of the year. And that back-to-back win presenting Emirates Team New Zealand with a unique opportunity, the chance to achieve the much desired three-peat. Well, today we're not looking back. We're here to talk about the release of the protocol for AC37, the document which outlines the terms that will govern the next America's Cup competition. And joining me from New Zealand with the America's Cup trophy glistening behind them are Grant Dalton, head of Emirates Team New Zealand, Aaron Young, Commodore of the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron, the defending yacht club. And a little later we will be joined by Emirates Team New Zealand's lead designer, Dan Bernasconi. And here with me in the UK, the challenger, Ben Ainsley, who leads INEOS Britannia, determined to bring the cup back to the United Kingdom, where this all began in 1851, as well as Bertie Bickett, representing the UK's Royal Yacht Squadron, the Challenging Cup. And later, James Allison, the team's brand new Chief Technical Officer, will also be with us. Grant, I'm going to start with you. For those that aren't familiar, perhaps outline some fundamentals. What's the difference between the deed of gift and the protocol that we've seen announced today?
Well, the whole thing started via the deed of gift after America won the race around the Isle of Wight in 1851. And basically it's a challenger's trophy. It stipulates the rules of a challenger's trophy. You can challenge the defender, as it might be at the time, after 10 months, 90 feet on the waterline. There's a whole bunch of things. It's a couple of pages long. And really that was all that happened. A challenger would challenge the defender, which was the New York Yacht Club, until 1970, when it became a multi-challenge event. And effectively what happened was the defender chose or came to a deal with what's called now a challenger of record. And between them they organised a set of rules which, amongst other things, allowed other challengers in. And that's the situation we have to this day. But in the event of no mutual consent, you revert back to the pure terms of the deed of gift. And when INEOS basically was accepted as challenger of record, or effectively challenged the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron via the Royal Squadron, they had to stipulate a certain number of things. They would race us in September next year in Britannia, but in the event of mutual consent, which we are now with the protocol, then other teams would be able to become involved as well and enter.
Ben, you've been on the same team as Grant Dalton, you've been fierce competitors, but this is a whole new relationship, isn't it? One that should be based on collaboration. How's it been going?
Well, look, I mean, this is a really bold and progressive protocol, and I don't think there's any chance we could have negotiated something like this if we didn't have a really good, healthy respect for one another, and the teams a healthy respect for each other. And so it's super exciting. I mean, I won't lie, there are a few moments where there are a few long breaths had to be taken, but Grant and the guys have been fantastic to work with, and a huge thank you for everyone involved to getting us to this point.
And exciting, I guess, to be in a position where you can shape the future.
Absolutely. I mean, we are all passionate about the sport of sailing. That's why we do it, why we love and why we compete. But like I said, this is a really progressive, bold protocol, and it required some collective thinking, being creative about how we could take the sport forwards, and in this day and age, that's what it's required for the Cup for the future.
Grant, it seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? But it has only been 8 months to the day since Emirates Team New Zealand won on home waters and INEOS Britannia became the challenger of record. It may seem like there hasn't been much going on, I guess, from the outside, but behind the scenes in Auckland, how busy has it been?
Yeah, well, we ramped up again pretty quickly. I mean, one of the things about the America's Cup is that you don't get a breath if you're the defender and really a challenger as well. You got to get going straight away, because decisions that you make now, you will only see the result of it at the time of the Cup, in this case in 2024. And along with negotiating the protocol, which is, as Ben said, it's not a compromise document, but it means that you have to have compromises between the organisations, and the relationship that is formed between Ben and this organisation and people that are working within INEOS has made it possible. Normally this would be the start of the unwinding of a relationship, basically, but in fact, because you don't agree and you're ending up fighting, but in fact it's not that way. It certainly was last time for us, but it's not that way this time at all. It's actually, I think, forged a strength between the clubs and the teams. The things that we've been working on, and really this is the design team and Kevin Shoebridge that runs the sailing team and the overall team. I'm kind of in both, the event and the team. AC40s, that's going to be an amazing boat. Hydrogen, we're well into build of our first hydrogen boat, which will launch in February. Reassembling our own team, and of course working on the venue, and that's been pretty tricky, as Aaron next to me can attest. That's probably about the hardest thing we've ever done.
Grant, before we get much further, let's cut to the chase and talk about the venue. There's been a huge amount of speculation, but what can you tell us at this stage about where the next America's Cup is going to be?
Well, we set a date originally of September the 17th to announce the venue, and honestly that was probably, well, in fact it was too ambitious. I guess the flip side of that coin is that if we hadn't set that date, we'd probably be lagging even more, because there'd be this feeling that we had more time. So that date of September 17th certainly focused the mind, and it's not easy. We're looking, New Zealand's not out of the picture, but it's, with the chances of it being here are quite slim. I mean, Auckland hasn't been helped by, this bloke Mark Dunphy, who's been running around spreading misinformation about numbers and cost, etc., when he actually knows the right numbers in the first place. And that has not helped the situation here at all.
Can you tell us the venues that are still in the running?
Well, they seem to tell themselves, really, and so we really have never actually spoken specifically about the venues. They tend to be in the press, and we'll let it, I think, go that way. And as I say, look, it's basically a 24-hour clock on venues. So while we're awake, we're working on it, and while we're asleep, Origin Sport with Stu and Leslie are working on it our night. And we're just moving this thing as fast as we can. It is a massive focus. Maybe there's just one from one bolter that no one knows about. You never know. And we'll leave it like that until we get to a final decision.
Ben, you spoke before about shared ideology for this and future Cups. Can you expand on what that means, both short term for this America's Cup, for America's Cup 37, but also looking ahead? What's the ambitious plan for the America's Cup?
Yeah, sure. I think both teams have been clear that we wanted to maintain the AC75 class of boat. We wanted to reduce the cost of participation, and we wanted the Cup to be more inclusive and diverse. And so you've seen that come through with the AC40 test boat, but that boat will also be used for the Women's America's Cup, the Youth America's Cup, and for some of the preliminary regattas. To have the first ever Women's America's Cup, I think is absolutely the way sailing should be going, leading the way in diversity and inclusion, and it's good to see.
I heard there was no age limit either, so you never know. On that
we'll sign you up
Aaron,
now.
It's never over. On that note, Aaron, let's come to you as Commodore of the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron. I mean, it was you that received that challenge from Bertie. Give us a little sneak peek behind the scenes. Take us back to that day.
Well, it was an exciting day. In some ways, I remember it like yesterday, and in other areas, I think of it like it was years ago. So, as Dolce mentioned, we've been doing a lot of work since. But it almost started after Bermuda in some sort of way, because you start thinking about what might have been, what could be, what may happen. and you end up behind the scenes, tucked away. In this case, I'm Matteo Denora's yacht, Imagine, and Bertie from the Royal Yacht Squadron presented us at the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron with a challenge for the 37th America's Cup when the guys crossed the line, and we committed to then. But the exciting thing about that was we all had pretty aligned objectives and what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to take the cup forward, take the event forward, move the sport forward, and that not just in terms of sailing, but in terms of sustainability, I guess, inclusion, diversity. Obviously, innovation and design has always been a key part to the America's Cup, and that will remain. So, we're looking forward to it, and very, very glad that we've got Royal Yacht Squadron and INEOS Britannia on board with us.
You've been heavily involved in this protocol. I mean, how pleased are you with the outcome about the evolution from the last Cup?
Well, this is a very exciting protocol. I mean, it breaks a lot of new ground, I suppose. And one thing we're particularly excited over is the inclusion of the Youth America's Cup and the Women's America's Cup, which are now part of the event and part of the protocol moving forward, and hopefully, remain that way for as long as we know. The Youth America's Cup, last time we had 19 paid entries from 13 international countries. Now, for that sort of inclusion to become part of the America's Cup, ultimately, it's got to be a good thing for the sport.
No, there's certainly an appetite for Aaron, that's for sure. Bertie, I'm going to ask you about the role of the yacht clubs. What role do they have in modern America's Cup? I mean, in the past, yacht clubs themselves played a central role, didn't they? They fielded campaigns, but in modern times, clubs are more and more have aligned, be more a partner in the whole thing. I mean, what's their role now in modern America's Cup?
Well, you're absolutely right in saying that the role has changed in over 170 years of the evolution of the America's Cup. Many relationships have changed between owners and teams and sailors and technical, and so it's a moving thing. Look, the role depends on the relationship, and the relationship depends on the people, and really it's just about people. And if you share a common goal, and you share a common view on how to reach that particular goal, then everything else will tend to fall into place. There is, for sure, a different role that the clubs now have than they did 100, 150 years ago. And that is all part of the evolution. And thank goodness this sport and this event has continued to evolve, and it's because it's continued to evolve that it's survived. And frankly, that's why we're sitting here talking about it today. We've been extremely lucky, I think, as a group to have all had that same vision. But you have to remember, for us, this is the third successive cup between club and team, and so far we're still talking to each other. It's all good.
Thanks, Bertie, and thanks very much for joining us today, and also Aaron, who are going to leave us. It's been a pleasure to hear your thoughts. And in a moment, we're going to talk all things technical with Emirates Team New Zealand Head of Design Dan Bernasconi, and from INEOS Britannia, James Allison. But before that, we've plenty to discuss. Let's talk number of challengers. There's no doubt everyone wants to see more teams. So a question to both Ben and Grant. I mean, tell us what changes we will see that will make it more accessible, that will facilitate more boats on the start line. Ben, what are you doing to encourage teams?
It's a great question, and we always talk in the America's Cup that the cost of participation is one of the big barriers of entry. And so with this protocol, we've really tried to find innovative ways to bring those costs down. So the AC40 we talked about is going to be a big player in this next Cup, both as a test boat and as a means for racing in the preliminary regattas and for the youth and the Women's Cup. The AC37, we're only building one boat, whereas opposed to two in the last Cup, and the crew numbers have come down from 11 to 8. So that is also going to make quite a significant cost saving. And then alongside that, we've got some initiatives like the shared Recon, the shared starting software package, and they will ultimately mean that you can reduce your resource in your design team. And but let's not forget this is a technical game, so we can't turn it into a one design race. And the thing I like about the protocol is there's still that element of technical design that ultimately will be the key driving factor for all of the teams just at a lower cost.
We'll come back to the shared Recon later. I'm curious to see how that's going to work in the America's Cup world. But Grant, let's come to you. I mean, realistically, if you're starting fresh, a brand new team, can you close that technical gap? And what's it going to cost?
Just to give you a perspective on that, in the last Cup, which is arguably the most technical ever, we spent less cash than we spent in Valencia for the 2007 campaign. Just let that sink in for a second. We spent less cash than we spent in Valencia. So we don't really buy into this whole, and that had the most challenges ever, Valencia. So we don't necessarily buy into that. Teams will always spend what they want to spend. But realistically, is a lot of the technical barriers are taken away. I mean, I know it sounds like a small thing, but starting software, you spend, ask Dan that, 2 guys full time for 2.5 years trying to do that if you're from scratch. The AC40 will have automatic pilot, so as a team tries to come up to speed, it doesn't have to suddenly sail a small boat that is out of control because they haven't got their systems properly sorted yet. There's, as Ben says, 1 boat, and also there's 4 boats that are all for sale, effectively, the first generation boats. So cost-wise, yep, it'll be an easier barrier, but it's still the America's Cup, as Ben says. There's a technology race, and so it isn't for everybody. It will never have 20 teams. It should never have 20 teams. But you've got to, if you accept that, you've got to make sure that teams are confident enough, or owners, that they can close the technology gap in time to be competitive in the next one. And a lot of these things, which are effectively one design now within that area, will help that.
We're going to talk a lot more about the 40s, but Ben, we're going to see them in action actually quite soon. Let's talk a little bit about the 3 preliminary regattas, one of which, the last one, will be held at the match venue in the 75s. I mean, the first 2 in the brand new 40s. Elaborate, Ben, a little on that and what Cup fans can expect.
Yeah, it's going to be great to see the 40 out in the water and the involvement, how that evolves into the 75 for the teams. And there's always the different design packages that come on the water and what teams are focusing on what areas of design to try and get the best overall package.
Leading the design efforts for both camps, we're joined by Dan Bernasconi in New Zealand, and joining me here is James Allison. The AC40s, Dan, wow, I mean, they look cool. Boats of this type are attracting a lot of attention around the world, with a generation of sailors now who are just growing up foiling. Why would you go slow? A huge trickle down from the America's Cup. Tell us what else they will be used for, how important they will be in the main America's Cup. Dan, when are we going to see one fly? What's the timeline on them?
So we're going to be building these boats at Maconochie. They're just starting to get into the tooling now, and they've got a pretty aggressive schedule for producing the boats, putting about 1 boat out every 3 weeks. And the first boat we expect to be sort of on a ship to the first team around July 2022, so hopefully in the water August or September next year.
Dan, let's talk about the main event, the AC37. It felt in Auckland like we were right in the beginning of what you could do with those machines. What lessons have been learned from AC36, and how much performance is still to come?
Yeah, there's still a huge amount to learn on the AC75s. We felt we pushed really hard in the last campaign, but there's still a lot more to give. And we've been working over the last few months on refining the AC75 rule, not a complete change, but just tweaking it in a lot of areas that are going to make the boats that much better performance, particularly in the light air. So going down from 11 crew to 8 crew, we're removing the code 0, which really, at the speeds these boats are going, even in the light air, isn't necessary, and removing it saves a lot of weight. So overall, with a number of weight savings, we're getting the boats about 1 tonne lighter. So in the light air, we're going to be able to take off and get up on the foils that much earlier.
Thanks, Dan. We can't wait to see that. James, your background is in the world of motorsport. You've worked with the biggest names in F1, now at Mercedes-AMG Petronas F1 team. You're no stranger to finding that winning edge amongst the density of detail and regulations. I mean, what are the similarities you're seeing in that regard between the worlds of F1 and AC?
Well, that's a question you could just as easily have put to Dan. He's someone with a strong F1 background as well. But I guess the most obvious similarity is that it's a sport where everything has to be right or nothing is right. You clearly have to have the best understanding of the physics of the boat so that you can come up with a concept that will be quicker than everyone else's. But no use having that mastery if you can't manufacture it, if you can't design that physics into parts that are actually realizable on the water. No point in doing that if you don't have a logistics system capable of getting it out to the event, or a commercial system and a marketing system able to generate the money to do that. And finally, no point in putting together all those competitive elements if you don't then have the sailors able to do the job on the water. And in that respect, it's really like F1. Every link has to be perfect. And because every link has to be perfect, it makes it a massive team event. And that's what F1 feels like. And that, from my very limited experience as a newbie to this sport, is exactly what America's Cup feels like too. A huge team effort. And that's what makes F1 fun. And I know that is what's going to make America's Cup fun for me, being privileged to join in with this challenge.
We do have a lot of rules and regulations. I mean, how similar is that to the motorcar world?
That is absolutely the same. Yeah, just a big old fat book full of opportunity that you need to learn, understand, and then make the best of.
You've been with Ben since the summer, so I'm sure you're beginning to get your head into it. What do you think is going to be required? I mean, put it into perspective, the challenge that is ahead.
Well, I think during the launch of our team a few weeks ago, I was asked a little bit about the nature of the challenge, and I ended up blurting out the words that America's Cup is proper hard. I think preface that by saying that Formula One is hard, but America's Cup is proper hard. And I guess what was motivating me to say that is that in F1 we have the comfort blanket of a TV deal. There is a certain amount of money that is given to every team just by virtue of being in the championship. In America's Cup, every penny of this campaign has to be garnered by the team itself in order to create the opportunity to go racing. The team has to be put back together. The band has to be assembled, Blues Brothers style, afresh at the beginning of this campaign, for a challenge that is of equal intellectual intensity to that of F1. But I guess if F1 teams were looking at the scale of an America's Cup challenge, they'd probably put about 500 people on it. But instead, an America's Cup team does it with around about 100 really hardy souls who are incredibly versatile engineers doing 3 jobs where an F1 person might just do the 1. And all of this is done under the most intense time pressure, where you're late before you start, and the job of trying to stay ahead of the deadlines through that campaign is daunting, to say the very least. As I said at the beginning, it's proper hard.
Ben, not so long ago, the AC37 was nothing but a concept, was it? A sketch on the back of a napkin.
The class has proven itself, and you know, as we were discussing earlier, the Cup needs continuity. I think the race in the Cup in Valencia in 2007, that was version 5 of that IACC class, and that was arguably one of the most successful Cups, or certainly in modern times, with over 10 teams competing and great competition, all the way from the teams there that were not particularly, were either new teams that were coming in, were taking on a second-hand boat effectively, but being able to modify that and still be competitive. And we'd love to see that with the 75 moving forwards. And you know, like I said, it's proven to be a hugely exciting boat, and we'd like to see it in the Cup for many years to come.
Grant, I mean, what excites you about the blueprint for the class in the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's more than just the class, because it's, that's just part of the progression going forward. As I said before, the 40s, the hydrogen, joint recon that we'll talk about. Everybody says a hydrogen foiling chase boat, that can't be that hard. Well, I can assure you it's been a lot of work, and it is hard. And the architecture of putting that together is quite tricky. A year from now, they'll be normal. So it's just, the whole thing excites me, not just one element.
Let's talk media. In a world where the modern fan expects to be behind closed doors, there are also the beginnings, aren't there, of some exciting ideas to increase engagement in our sport. How's it going to work, Ben, and why was it important to establish it in the protocol?
Well, we all want to see the sport progress and to bring in more spectators, more fans. We've seen the success of Drive to Survive in Formula One, so we're going to have Sail to Survive in the America's Cup. I'm not entirely sure, but and to be fair, Daltz has really been driving this hard, and the Team New Zealand, and rightly so. We want to increase participation. We also want to increase the fan base for the sport. That's really important for the commercial viability of the sport. And we've seen some great initiatives in the sport, I think, in recent times, both in inshore racing and offshore racing. The America's Cup is obviously a huge part of that, and needs to be attracting that support and that following. So it's good to see.
I'll come back to Grant on this. I mean, Grant, Emirates Team New Zealand, your door is more firmly shut than most teams. How, in reality, do you see this working, and why do you think it's important to do?
Yeah, well, it's actually quite a good question for James, because the first season of Drive to Survive, Mercedes and Ferrari, I think, said we're not having a bar of that, and after that they had to. And so we've really just taken our lead from that. And I'd imagine that every sport in the planet is trying to do the same thing or repeat that. But there's not any other sports that are really technically based in the same way that Formula One is and America's Cup, that creates, I mean, you can have the Michael Jordan story, for example. We could have the Ben Ainsley story, it'd be pretty interesting. We could put some stories into that one. But I think, basically you've got to get trust of the teams, that it's not some Trojan horse that we're putting in to work out what they're doing. So it has to be set away independently in AC media. We then got to sell it, and we know Drive to Survive went through Netflix, and we're already in that process now. So it will be independent. We can only learn from what these guys have pioneered, and hopefully we'll have some compelling stories. But that's only a piece of what we're trying to do in opening this up, because it's instant social now. It has to happen now. There's no point in coming on the telly in 3 months' time, which is again the joint recon. So it's all put together to try and engage, be more instant, and be through the social networks, which are really kind of where everything is now.
James, Drive to Survive has such an incredible effect on the sport. I saw some stats today from the GP in the US, and they did a survey at the gate, and 30% of men and 50% of women who went because they'd watched the series. What an incredible effect.
Yeah, it has been. I think it's taken all of the teams by surprise just what a galvanising effect it's had on the sport. Personally, I do my best to hide every time the Netflix cameras come by, but the humanising of a sport that was always regarded as very complex, very sort of elite, but actually getting the cameras behind the scenes and showing the zoo of people that are there, and letting people fall in love with or despise the very large and colourful characters that are in the paddock has brought legions of fans to the sport. And with the small amount of exposure I've had to the America's Cup community, I think the same thing will happen, because there is an awful lot of colour and big characters in this sport too.
We love the drama. It's so good, and the drama continues now the season's on. Ben, like Formula One, secrecy is drilled into AC teams at every level. It's in the very DNA of the event. But for 37, there's some interesting changes, aren't there? Walk us through those.
Well, probably the most interesting thing is the shared reconnaissance and the fact that that will all end up on a central website. So whilst we're all coming up with these amazing designs and developments, that's going to be for the world to see and the other teams to see, which will make it pretty fascinating, I think, in terms of how you bring your developments online, in terms of how other teams can react to that, but also for the fans out there that love the technical side of the sport to be able to get a real insight into what the different teams are focusing on, how they're tackling the challenge of the 75 and wherever the venue is in terms of the conditions that we'll be facing. I think that'll be great, and like you said, having the access to the teams, seeing those personalities grow, be they sailors are obvious one, but actually the technical guys are arguably more important in the America's Cup. But it's also, you know, the amazing characters that you didn't realise were there, you know, be they in a, you know, the team you're helping prepare the boat, the shore team. These guys are normally putting in the hardest hours on any of the teams, or in any area of these teams. There's going to be characters that no one's ever heard of before that will come to the fore and be part of making it a fantastic show.
I like what you say about shared recon. I mean, Dan, perhaps you could explain how practically that is going to work.
Yeah, the joint recon is something that I'm really excited about. We've, as a team and as an America's Cup community, we've always had reconnaissance, and so in every campaign, each team has had team members that are employed purely to go and follow each other's boats and report back. But that's always been private. So, you know, we've had our recon teams, INEOS has had recon teams, Luna Rossa has had recon teams. And at the same time, we've got a huge number of fans who are just sort of scrabbling for bits of information, because with the America's Cup only happening every 3 or 4 years, there's these huge gaps where in between there's just really not much information coming out. So the joint recon is completely a win-win. From a team's point of view, we actually can save money by just having sort of one recon team per America's Cup team. So you don't have sort of 4 teams out there following Team New Zealand and 4 teams following INEOS. But for the fans, it's going to be amazing, because every day they go out, straight after sailing, there'll be reports up on websites on what teams have done, whether a team's launched a new foil, you know, whether they've capsized, all sorts of things, statistics about how many days sailing they've had, how many hours, how many breakdowns. So it's going to be a complete game changer for our loyal community of fans. And I think, you know, as the other guys have said, it's just going to raise the profile of the sport and be a really dramatic change for the media side.
Well, Dan, we love stats. We can't wait for that. Dan, the class rule sits beside the protocol and outlines much of the technical specification for the boats themselves. What are the highlights of the class rule?
Yeah, I mean, the class rule, it is a evolution of the previous class rule. It's version 2 of the AC37 class rule. But we've made a lot of changes to improve the performance of the boats and save some costs. So the boat's got a lot lighter, 8 crew instead of 11. The foil wings have increased in their span, so I've gone from 4 metres to 4.5 and a little bit deeper. And that just means that we'll be that much more efficient right across the speed range, but particularly at the low end of the speed range. The jib tacking is going to become more efficient without the requirement to have a winch. And we're opening the door on human power, so cyclers are coming back if you want them. You can go with grinding or cycling. And then on the aerodynamic side, we're allowing a lot more modern control systems for the control of the jib and the mainsail. So that allows us to use more sophisticated methods to accurately control the hydraulics which are powering the mainsail and the jib. So all these things together in a package are going to just elevate the AC75s to a real Generation 2.
The cyclers are back. Thanks, Dan, for that update, and thanks to everybody here and in New Zealand for joining us today and for sharing with us the exciting road ahead for AC37, which, as the protocol outlines, is packed full of new plans to take the America's Cup to the next level. Here's a look at the timeline, and it's all beginning to happen pretty quickly. Amidst lots of rumours and speculations, entries will open on the 1st of December, just in 2 weeks' time. And we will have some idea then of who is really in the game. And also by next June, we could see new teams flying around in the AC37. Exciting times. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you soon.